He says, "I want to fuck scos you." And I said to him, "That sounds horrible. So I would like to know." I didn't want to write about any of them, but you did. My editor said, "You have to leave some blood on the page." Barbara Streisand confessed at 83 before unleashing a jaw-dropping list of 7 musicians she could never stand. Known for her powerhouse voice and perfectionist reputation, Streisand didn't hold back, calling out divas with no discipline and men who mistook arrogance for talent. The music world is reeling from the names she dropped. Some of them were even past collaborators. Brace yourself. This list changes everything. David Bowie. Barbara Streisand had always admired David Bowie from a distance. His bold artistry, his continual reinvention, his fearless relationship with image and sound, these were things that captivated her. "You could never pin him down," she once said, and that was thrilling to watch as an outsider. She followed his trajectory through Ziggy Stardust, The Thin White Duke, and beyond, fascinated by his refusal to be contained by any one genre or identity. To her, Bowie represented a kind of creative courage that was rare, even among icons. So when the opportunity arose in the late 1970s for a potential collaboration, a genre-bending duet for an ambitious television special, Streisand was immediately intrigued. The idea was fresh and unexpected, a fusion of glam rock's surreal energy and Broadway's emotional polish. It wasn't just about making music, Streisand explained years later. It was about creating a moment, something nobody would see coming, something that defied easy explanation. Their first meeting was set in London at Bowie's insistence, in a quiet cafe surrounded by avant-garde paintings and obscure jazz drifting from the speakers. It was intimate, unusual, very Bowie. Streisand had come prepared to talk arrangements, structure, vocal interplay. But what followed, she later recalled with a laugh, was more like an improvisational philosophy seminar than a planning session. Bowie, charming but elusive, greeted her with metaphors and riddles. "I asked about tempo," Streisand said, and he responded with a quote about time being an illusion. "I asked about melody. He asked if I believed in parallel dimensions." It was dazzling, no doubt, but also disorienting. She described Bowie's energy as mesmerizing but hard to ground. "He was enigmatic to a fault," she admitted. "You could sit across from him for an hour and still not know what he actually wanted to do." Still hoping that the chemistry might emerge in the creative space, Streisand agreed to a few exploratory sessions in the studio. She came in prepared, as always, sheet music, annotated lyrics, vocal cues all carefully planned. Bowie, on the other hand, arrived like a gust of wind. He refused to rehearse, preferring to let the energy in the room shape the sound in real time. He didn't want structure, Streisand recalled. He wanted to float, to feel, to let the universe decide. For someone like Streisand, who thrived on musical precision, layered harmonies and narrative arcs, this approach was chaotic. One moment he wanted a dark synth pop undertone. The next he wanted ambient jazz. We were shifting styles mid-take. No one knew which version we were committing to. She likened it to chasing a balloon in the wind, mesmerizing, impossible to catch. Even their voices, both extraordinary in their own ways, struggled to find harmony. Streisand sought unity and emotional arc. Bowie was chasing atmosphere. "I need connection," she explained. "I need to look across the room and see someone who's meeting me halfway." With David, I felt like I was chasing shadows. And it wasn't just musical, it was philosophical. Streisand described herself as grounded, someone who builds from the inside out, who needs a clear foundation before she can soar. David was the opposite. He was floating, poetic, but untethered. It was beautiful to witness, but impossible to hold on to. After a few fragmented sessions, it became clear that the collaboration wasn't working. No songs were completed, no recordings released. The project was quietly abandoned. Both artists moving on with no public statement, no acrimony, just silence. Reflecting on the experience years later, Streisand harbored no ill will. In fact, she expressed a kind of deep, unconventional respect. He was a genius in his own right, she said, but not everyone's genius plays well with others. With David, I never felt anchored. I was trying to build a bridge, and he was designing a spaceship. There was no bitterness in her recollection, just honesty and a wistful sense of lost possibility. She didn't regret the attempt, only that they couldn't meet in the middle. Sometimes, she said, the most brilliant minds aren't meant to collaborate. They're meant to orbit separately, shining in their own way. And in the end, that's what she and Bowie did. Two artists illuminating different corners of the creative universe, never quite aligned, but never diminished. Prince. In the late 1980s, the music world briefly buzzed with the possibility of an unexpected pairing. Barbara Streisand and Prince. On paper, it sounded like alchemy. Two titans of artistry from completely different spheres coming together to create something bold, genre-defying, and unforgettable. Streisand, ever the perfectionist, known for her soaring vocals and emotional precision, was intrigued by the idea of collaborating with someone as audacious and inventive as Prince. He was electric, she said. He could take funk, rock, R&B, gospel, blend them together, and make something you've never heard before. I admired that fearlessness. The admiration was mutual, at least from a distance. There was no doubt that both artists respected each other's trailblazing careers. Streisand was in a period of creative experimentation at the time, exploring new sonic territory and seeking fresh voices to push her into unexplored directions. Prince, riding high from the success of Sign of the Times, was at the peak of his mystical, genre-shattering power. The idea was to fuse their energies into a haunting, slow-tempo ballad, an atmospheric orchestral piece laced with Prince's signature funk grooves. The vision was ambitious. The execution, however, proved impossible. We spoke on the phone a few times, Streisand recalled. He had a soft voice, almost a whisper. He'd talk in riddles like he was half poet, half mystic. I remember hanging up the phone wondering if we'd actually had a conversation, or if I dreamed it. From the outset, it was clear that Prince operated on his own wavelength, philosophically, creatively, and logistically. Streisand, whose process is rooted in clarity, planning, and precision, tried to steer their collaboration toward some semblance of structure. She suggested studio dates, outlined lyrical themes, and even sent over a rough sketch of how the duet could unfold. In return, Prince would respond days or weeks later with cryptic notes, stream of consciousness musings, or unlabeled cassette tapes. He sent me a tape once, Streisand said, with no label, no context, just ambient sounds, maybe a piano, maybe a vocal line fading in and out. It was beautiful, but what was I supposed to do with it? It felt like collaborating with someone already halfway through a dream. Attempts to bring order to the creative chaos were fruitless. Streisand's team eventually secured a studio session at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, hoping it would be the breakthrough moment, finally bringing the two icons face to face in a room with instruments and engineers ready. But Prince never arrived. No call, no explanation. He vanished. Days later, Streisand received word that Prince had been in the middle of something spiritual and couldn't be disturbed. That was the breaking point. I realized then, you don't collaborate with Prince, she said. You orbit him, and I don't orbit anybody. For Streisand, who thrives on emotional precision and musical clarity, the unpredictability wasn't merely inconvenient, it was incompatible with her creative DNA. I need a partner, she said, someone who wants to build something together. With Prince, it felt like chasing a ghost. Beautiful, fascinating, but unreachable. Despite the frustration, there was no animosity in her reflection, only awe and acceptance. Prince was a world unto himself, she said, an incredible visionary, but completely untouchable. You couldn't catch him, and maybe that was part of his magic. The project was quietly shelved. No tracks were recorded, no statements issued, but the would-be collaboration remains one of those tantalizing what-ifs in music history, a missed moment between two icons who operated on opposite frequencies. I never stopped admiring him, Streisand later said, but sometimes admiration isn't enough. You can look up at a star, but it doesn't mean you can reach it. Eric Clapton. In the early 1990s, Barbara Streisand was reimagining her musical landscape. After decades of crafting lush, orchestrated pop ballads and Broadway-infused standards, she found herself drawn towards something more stripped down, raw, and intimate. She envisioned an album that leaned into acoustic textures, one that felt organic and honest. It was during this exploratory phase that Eric Clapton's name began to surface repeatedly. Known not just for his guitar virtuosity, but for his deeply emotive style, Clapton seemed, on paper, like the ideal collaborator to inject a soulful edge into Streisand's evolving sound. I'd always admired his guitar work, Streisand later said. His emotion, the way he bent a note to tell a story. It was beautiful, but admiration doesn't always translate into chemistry. Encouraged by mutual industry friends, a session was set up in Los Angeles. Streisand approached the opportunity with her usual care and precision. She had selected a blues-tinged ballad, introspective and slow-burning, that she felt would suit Clapton's guitar sensibility, while also allowing space for her vocal phrasing to breathe. I thought it was something that could meet us in the middle, she said, a song with room for his soulfulness and my storytelling. But from the moment Clapton walked into the studio, Streisand sensed a disconnect. He came in late, sunglasses on, barely said hello, she recalled. He was polite enough, but you could tell his body was there, his mind wasn't. She noticed the lack of engagement right away. Clapton showed no interest in the sheet music Streisand had painstakingly prepared. When she offered to rehearse, he brushed it off. Just play the track, he said. I'll figure it out. Streisand wasn't opposed to improvisation. She respected it, in fact, but what struck her was the absence of curiosity. You can be spontaneous and still be connected, but he seemed bored before the first note. As the session began, the gap between their artistic temperaments became glaringly clear. Clapton's guitar work, while technically flawless, didn't align with Streisand's phrasing. There was no conversational give and take, no emotional tether between voice and instrument. Streisand tried to adapt, shifting her tone and timing to better mesh with his playing. She gently offered suggestions, minor adjustments to tempo or dynamics, but her efforts met with indifference. He wasn't rude, she emphasized, but he wasn't present either. He'd nod, shrug, maybe play something vaguely in the direction of what we discussed. But music is a dialogue. This felt like a monologue. The energy in the room grew more strained with each take. Streisand recalled a moment when, after she proposed another retake to fine-tune the harmony between the vocal line and guitar, Clapton audibly sighed, long and loud. It wasn't subtle, she said. He was ready to go before we'd even started. Not long after, a producer discreetly shared that Clapton had never really been on board with the idea. According to the source, he had expressed skepticism early on, reportedly saying Streisand's music wasn't really his thing. The revelation hit harder than she expected. That stung a little, Streisand admitted. Not because he didn't like my work. That's okay. We all have our preferences. But if you don't want to be there, don't show up. Respect the process. respect the room. No usable tracks came out of the session. The duet was shelved, and Clapton's guitar never made it onto Streisand's final album. Reflecting on the experience, she remains gracious but candid. "We're both artists," she said, "but we speak different musical languages. He's blues and smoke. I'm orchestration and light. Sometimes those elements blend. This time, they repelled." In the end, Streisand didn't hold a grudge, only a greater understanding of what she needs in a creative partner: presence, openness, and above all, mutual respect. "You can't force connection," she said. And collaboration, real collaboration, only works when both people are reaching for the same song, even if they're coming at it from different directions. Miles Davis' Barbara Streisand has long been known for her reverence for artistry and innovation. Over the years, she has worked with a vast array of legendary musicians, always seeking depth, nuance, and the possibility of creating something greater than the sum of its parts. So, when the idea of collaborating with Miles Davis was first brought to her in the late 1980s, she didn't hesitate. "I was intrigued, genuinely," she said. "I respected him tremendously. Miles was a force, a visionary. I thought we could make something bold, unexpected." The collaboration was the brainchild of a high-profile producer who believed that pairing Barbara Streisand's polished theatrical vocals with Davis's moody, abstract trumpet could open new creative frontiers. Barbara herself envisioned the possibility of creating a kind of musical conversation, her voice and his horn weaving in and out of each other in cinematic interplay. "It was a risk," she admitted, "but the kind I like. I thought, what if we created something that felt like a score to an emotion, a duet without words between two storytellers?" That dream unraveled quickly. Their first studio session was, as Barbara put it, a masterclass in disconnection. Streisand arrived early, as she always did, with meticulously prepared sheet music, a clear arrangement, and a small team of trusted musicians and vocal coaches. Davis, she said, showed up almost an hour late. He entered the studio without a word, sunglasses on, expression unreadable, and refused to acknowledge most of the people in the room. "He barely said 10 words, Streisand recalled. He looked at the charts, shook his head, and said, "We don't need that." That was it. From there, the session devolved into what Streisand described as an awkward standoff disguised as a jam. Davis began to play, but his phrasing was off from what she had prepared. She tried adjusting, slowing her tempo, shifting her tone, but nothing clicked. Davis would stop mid-phrase or suddenly change keys without warning. "It felt like I was trying to sing into a void," she said. "No eye contact, no feedback, just these improvisational bursts that didn't acknowledge me at all." What frustrated Streisand most wasn't the musical risk, it was the refusal to engage. She repeatedly attempted to find middle ground, asking Davis if he wanted to explore different keys, tempos, or styles. He would just shrug or look away, she said. It wasn't shyness, it was dismissal. Barbara even tried to anchor the collaboration around common musical ground, suggesting they revisit classics by Gershwin or Cole Porter, songwriters both had praised in the past. But Davis waved off the idea entirely, reportedly muttering that he was done with that museum music. "There was no dialogue," she said, "no curiosity, no interest in what I brought to the table. It was his way or silence. The silence between takes was no easier." Streisand made several attempts to connect, asking about Davis's influences, his favorite records, even light conversation about the weather or his travels. He'd either mumble something impossible to decipher or ignore me completely, she recalled. He didn't want connection. He wanted control or nothing. The final straw came during what would be their last session. In the middle of a take, Davis abruptly stopped playing, packed up his horn, and walked out without a word. I was still singing, Streisand remembered, still hoping to find the bridge between us. But the door closed, and that was that. Looking back, she acknowledges the sting of the experience, but doesn't regret the attempt. Miles Davis was a genius. Absolutely, she said, but he lived in his own world, one where there wasn't room for anyone else unless they conformed completely. Streisand took away a hard-earned lesson from the ordeal that even two brilliant artists can fail to connect if there's no mutual respect or openness. Genius doesn't guarantee chemistry, she said, and admiration from afar is sometimes the only kind that works. For Streisand, the failed collaboration with Miles Davis was not a musical tragedy, it was a reality check. It taught me that collaboration is about generosity, she said, about listening as much as leading. And if one person refuses to meet you halfway, there's nowhere to go, you stop walking toward them. In the end, her respect for Davis's legacy remained untouched, but the door to any future collaboration, she made clear, was permanently shut. Frank Sinatra. Though both Barbara Streisand and Frank Sinatra were titans of American music, with legacies cemented long before their paths ever crossed, their personal and professional chemistry was more friction than fire. Streisand has spoken candidly over the years about her brief but intense encounters with Sinatra, particularly their one failed attempt at a musical collaboration in the early 1970s. While the pairing might have seemed like a dream to record executives and fans alike, two iconic voices, generations apart, sharing a microphone, the reality proved to be far more complicated. It just didn't work, Streisand explained in a retrospective interview decades later. We were two very different artists with very different philosophies about music, performance, and even life. She described Sinatra's studio presence as not merely confident, but commanding to the point of suffocation. He'd walk in and expect everything to revolve around him. No room for compromise, she said. It was more about control than craft. According to Streisand, Sinatra didn't collaborate. He dominated. And for an artist like her, known for meticulous preparation and creative autonomy, that dynamic created instant tension. Still, her respect for Sinatra's talent, particularly his early work, remains intact. His phrasing, his timing, no one could touch that, she admitted. I studied him when I was younger. He could wrap a lyric around his finger like silk. But admiration doesn't always translate to compatibility. Their professional circles often intersected. Benefit concerts, industry events, even award galas. And for years, there were whispers about a possible duet. Record executives loved the idea. Sinatra, the smooth crooner with swing-era roots, and Streisand, the powerhouse vocalist of Broadway and ballads. It had commercial magic written all over it. The problem was, according to Streisand, the talks always started with enthusiasm, but unraveled almost instantly. It wasn't just a personality clash, she said. It was philosophical. Frank believed in capturing raw emotion in 1 or 2 takes, tops. He didn't understand my process. I like rehearsing, exploring the arrangement, making sure every note has a purpose. He called that overproducing. I thought he was rushing brilliance. When they finally stepped into the studio together in the early 1970s, the atmosphere was tense from the beginning. Streisand recalled that Sinatra arrived late, disheveled, aloof, and barely acknowledged the musical arrangement she and her team had prepared. Without warning, he demanded a change in key and dismissed the charts with a wave of his hand. It was like he expected the music to mold itself around him, she said, and when I pushed back, gently, he acted like I'd committed some offense. The session quickly unraveled. Sinatra balked at harmonizing a key section of the track, saying it wasn't his style, and abruptly left before they could finish a full take. That session was never revisited, and the duet that might have been never made it past a rough attempt. But the problems weren't limited to the studio. Streisand also spoke about the subtle but exhausting sexism she encountered in Sinatra's presence. He was old school in a way that didn't age well, she said. There were little comments about my voice, my looks, my being difficult, that wouldn't have been said to a man. It wore me down. Their political and personal differences only widened the rift. At one gala in the late 1960s, Streisand recalled a particularly icy exchange where Sinatra dismissed her political activism as Hollywood noise. She was stunned. He had no patience for anything he didn't agree with, she said. If you weren't in his corner, you were dismissed. She acknowledged that he could be charming when it suited him, but that charm evaporated if he was questioned or challenged. It wasn't even about ego, she reflected. It was about dominance. He needed to prove he was in charge. That's not art. That's theater, and not the good kind. Despite it all, Streisand harbors no bitterness. She remains gracious in how she reflects on the experience. Some people don't mix, she said simply. And Frank and I? We were oil and water. Iconic, yes, but combustible. The failed collaboration remains a fascinating footnote in both their careers. A glimpse into what might have been, and a reminder that greatness in music doesn't always guarantee harmony and personality. For Streisand, the lesson was clear. Even legends can clash, and sometimes the smartest thing an artist can do is walk away with their integrity intact. Madonna. Among the many names tied to hypothetical collaborations with Barbara Streisand over the decades, none has stirred as much fascination or friction as Madonna. Fans often imagined what might happen if the reigning queen of theatrical ballads and the provocateur of pop ever shared a stage. But to Barbara Streisand, the idea was never remotely viable. We're both strong women, she said bluntly, but there's a difference between strength and steam rolling. From the start, the two artists represented opposite ends of the musical and cultural spectrum. Streisand, with her background in stagecraft, classic standards, and emotionally layered vocals, crafted her work with meticulous care and structure. Madonna, by contrast, burst onto the scene wielding rebellion like a weapon, bold, brash, unpredictable, and proud of it. We were never in the same lane, Streisand said, and we were never trying to be. Still, the media was quick to fuel comparisons and rumors of a rivalry. Two alpha women navigating a male-dominated industry with undeniable success, but wildly different approaches. According to Streisand, the tension wasn't just tabloid fodder. There were real moments, real offers, she said. We were pitched a few collaborations over the years, a duet, a televised special, even a benefit concert. Every time I passed, it wasn't fear, it was instinct. It would have been chaos. That instinct, she explained, came from their personal and professional incompatibility. The few times they did cross paths in private settings only reinforced her decision. She's unfiltered to the point of abrasiveness, Streisand recalled. That might work in certain circles, but in a collaborative setting, it's disruptive. One of the most vivid examples came during a private industry dinner in the early 1990s. Streisand was seated just a few chairs away from Madonna at a small gathering of artists and executives. She arrived late, loud and ready to dominate the room, Streisand said. Before dessert, she had casually critiqued everyone's recent work, including mine. She told me I was too precious for pop, as if that was some kind of backhanded compliment. It wasn't. For Streisand, the issue wasn't confidence, it was decorum. There's a way to be bold without being brash, she said. She hadn't learned that yet, or didn't care to. Creatively, the mismatch was just as stark. Streisand described her process as deliberate and layered. She thrives on rehearsal, orchestration, and thoughtful emotional arcs. Madonna, by contrast, thrives on provocation, reinvention, and instinctual spontaneity. It's not just that our styles differ. It's that our philosophies don't intersect at all, Streisand explained. I don't throw things at the wall to see what sticks. She does. I'm building stories. She's detonating expectations. You can admire both, but you can't always merge them. Despite the clash, Streisand made it clear that she didn't dismiss Madonna's legacy. She's a powerhouse, no question, she said. She's forged her own path unapologetically. That takes guts. I respect her for that, but respect doesn't require alignment, and it certainly doesn't mean we'd make great music together. Over the years, rumors of tension continued to swirl, often reignited by interviews or indirect jabs. But Streisand insists that her stance never came from animosity, just realism. People confuse strength with sameness, she said. Just because we're both dominant women doesn't mean we're destined to join forces. Some energies don't harmonize. They cancel each other out. When asked directly if she ever regretted not collaborating with Madonna, Streisand's answer was firm. Not once. Some forces just don't belong in the same room. Now in her 80s, Streisand has nothing left to prove. With a legacy of chart-topping albums, legendary performances, and a creative voice that's never wavered, she continues to speak candidly about the people and projects that shaped or sidestepped her career. I don't say these things to be harsh, she said. I say them because they're true. And at this point in life, I think I've earned the right to say what I mean. For Barbara Streisand, the goal was never shock value. It was sincerity. And as she looks back on the road, not taken with Madonna, she does so with clarity, not curiosity. She bulldozes. I build. That's not a rivalry. It's just reality. What do you think about the 7 musicians that Barbara Streisand hates the most? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.